Hi, my name is Leon Keater, and this is my autoethnography of how my education has impacted my views on race, cultural and ethnic difference, and Indigenous peoples. The way that I'd like to structure the presentation is taking you through a journey of my education. So I've been fortunate enough to pretty much have been in education since primary school. So we'll start at the beginning, which was in the UK. I'm going on to my secondary school, which is in the same town, um, but I went to a single sex school. The My university education was then in the Midwest of America. Um, Going on to my coaching education, which has been here in Australia for the last 5 to 6 years, and then touching on my master's education over the last few months and the impact that's had on me. So, obviously, starting right at the beginning, um, when looking back on my first steps of education at primary school, I think it's been pretty profound in forming my views on race, culture, and ethnicity. And in honest reflection, it's probably had the most positive and negative impacts on my views. So I'm from a small town in the UK, um, which is relatively isolated from large parts of the country in the East Midlands. And it's very much a working class area with a low socioeconomic status. Its agricultural landscape dictates the opportunities or lack of opportunities. And the school I attended was in the lower socioeconomic area of the town. My mum worked in the local shop, and my dad was a welder. So um, the only expectation they had of me really was to give my best, and they were pretty strong with me on this. Um, Now, at the school, I believe the hidden curriculum of the school produced a deficit theory. So, Randall Collins says that in education, we often talk about the deficit perspective, um, defining students by their weaknesses rather than their strengths. And he says that the deficit theory takes this attitude a step further, suggesting that poor people are poor because of their own moral and intellectual deficiencies. Now, while I was fortunate enough that both my parents were around and they held jobs and were a positive influence on my education and personality, many others in my class weren't as lucky. Many were from one parent homes, or parents who weren't able to hold down steady jobs and they lacked guidance. Um, Many students in the school's parents also attended the school and were still living in the same area. And the expectation was this cycle would continue. The deficit theory produced told us that we were poor and that poor people will behave badly, make wrong decisions, and won't amount to much. And it was our fault. So this had a huge impact then on the next steps of education. So in the area that I grew up in, we had and we still have a single sex secondary schools that could only be attended by passing an academic test. So from our school, we knew that every year only very few people would pass the test and get into the school. Um, And according to the readings in Education, Change and Society, a dominant discourse is the accepted and general understanding of norms and standards which are taken for granted. And the dominant discourse at this school was to fail, and it was okay to do so. It was even okay not to try. So one of my best friends, who always got similar or better results than me, even at primary school age, purposely failed the test. Well, at least he said he did at the time, and still says that he did. Just because the culture in the school was to not try, and that it was okay to not be the best you can be, and this manifested in itself. Which moves on to my secondary education. So, as I mentioned, you had to pass a test to get into a grammar school, which I managed to do so. However, my friendship group remained that of those that I went to primary school with and now all went to different schools. And this was where my initial understanding of meritocracy developed. Um, So according to the Merriam-Webster Dictionary, meritocracy is defined as a system, organisation, or society in which people are chosen and moved into positions of success, power, and influence on the basis of their demonstrated abilities and merit. So I was now at a school where everyone had taken and passed the same test, and everyone had done so on their own capabilities. Um, there were still obvious varieties in academic level, however, there was now a different expectation. So, the dominant discourse of this school was now that we would go on to achieve something, that we would go on to further education. We were more engaged, we could want for more, and we could expect to do it. Um, Now, I felt everyone here was on a level playing field. So we had the same access to the same teachers and lessons and facilities and surroundings. And I believe we was all equal. And I believe we had reached this due to our individual capabilities. It's not until really looking back now um, on my secondary school and how the myth of meritocracy comes into play. Pierre Bourdieu claims um, meritocracy to be an imaginary universe where ultimately things just aren't fair and we don't have a level playing field. So when looking at the people who attended this school, the vast majority, including myself, came from a fortunate background. Um, the people who attended the school all had improved economic, social, and cultural status from their families, which gave us that head start to then get to that school. Which kind of leads me into my university experience. So, um, going to university in America, the economic, social, and cultural capital is a concept that continued into my experience. So, growing up in the UK, I played football as everybody does. When I wasn't able to make it professional, and what I was able to do was combine my football background and my academic background to get a scholarship to attend a university in America, in Nebraska, in the Midwest. Um, so upon entering the university on an athletic scholarship and as an international student, immediately brought a certain economic, social, and cultural capital. So according to Pierre Bourdieu, economic capital relates to financial support. So the financial support that I had was my scholarship. So I wasn't paying out of my own pocket to go to university and get my degree. The social capital relates to your network. So playing on a team for the university and being an international student meant students, professors, alumni, um, people in the local community sort of knew who you were immediately, which brought you a massive network immediately. Cultural capital relates to the possession of accomplishments. So being on a sports team immediately informs others that you have attained a certain level of achievement and accomplishment. So without being overly aware of it, I was entering university with huge advantages. Now, having moved over to the USA, this was also then the first time that I really became aware of Indigenous communities. Being from the UK, the explicit curriculum is about the UK, is about the colonisation of the world and the people that set sail to find the British colony. So this was the first time I'd came across Indigenous people and post-colonialism. Which is the effect and impact of colonial imperialism, which has then resulted in unequal power relations. So, while the explicit curriculum of the USA sort of celebrates the forming of the Constitution and its founding fathers as a tale of bravery and accomplishment, there's an underlying acceptance within the hidden curriculum that there were the Indigenous communities there long before this happened. There's a sense of something needs to be done about it. This can be seen with the gifting of certain areas and land for these communities, but really this just highlights the unequal power relations between the two and the struggle that continues. Um, this sort of power relation struggle leads into my coaching education in a slightly different context. So, having spent a total of 5 years in the USA, and after a brief 6 month spell back to the UK, I decided to book a one-way ticket to Australia. I had little sort of financial support at the time and needed to get a job immediately, and I didn't really have an idea of what I was going to do. Now, as I said, football has always been my passion, and I quickly and fortunately found a position working in football, which allowed me to then continue my education as well. So I've gone on to complete my FFA C, then B, then A license while being here in Australia. So the football system in Australia is pretty complicated with different layers, and it was sort of clear on the course that these different layers were apparent. So um, the concept of othering and assimilation was sort of born upon me. So according to John A. Powell, othering is based on a conscious or unconscious assumption that a certain identified group poses a threat to the favoured group. Or it's also been said as a social or psychological way in which one group excludes or marginalises another group. Assimilation is the integration into the dominant culture. So, as there are multiple layers of football systems here in Australia, when on the courses, there are people involved in those different layers. And it's clear, sort of on the course, that those who came from certain positions and certain layers held more social capital than others, which quickly resulted in the forming of groups. There was then a general acceptance that the group with this sort of strong social capital became the dominant group, and it was pretty obviously expected that the other groups would need to quickly assimilate to their way of thinking. Which brings me on to my masters. So I'm only in my first semester of the course, but I think it's already had a bit of an impact on my views. And each of the 3 classes I'm taking have sort of led to strengthening my beliefs. So one concept that's really sort of struck home is that of neoliberalism, which is something that I was aware of, however, not to the sort of extent it was having and the influence that it's playing. So according to the readings in Education, Change and Society, neoliberalism is a philosophy in which policy is dominated by market principles, privatisation, free trade, deregulation and individualism. So in coming to grips with it, I can see how it's sort of impacting every level of society. Having just left working for a private company, I know firsthand the use of managerialism, emphasising the efficiency and effectiveness. So, in a school context, by centralising the management of schools, but still giving the impression of local control, in my opinion, is leading to a bit of a lack of genuine care and compassion, which is vital in the education system. Without that care and compassion, people will fall through the cracks. And that's something we can't just put down to the individual and say it was your fault. My current studies has also opened my eyes again further to Indigenous communities and that imbalance of power. And I honestly think that lots of people would just never fully appreciate or understand the struggles that Indigenous communities have. It's led me to realise further how, as a teacher, I've got to be more compassionate and have the ability to adapt on a day-to-day basis and from student to student. So in summary, how my education has impacted my views on race, cultural and ethnic difference and Indigenous people. I've been fortunate to have a variety of experiences that's helped shape my views. So within this presentation, there's been lots of topics I've been able to discuss that my experiences have brought out, which has all culminated in an understanding that we must always be genuinely open-minded and be ever evolving and adapting to situations. Here's a list of my references. I hope you enjoyed the presentation, and I look forward to getting some feedback. Thank you.